be a compliment to you that the children are behaving in a certain way. So they're saying, good on you, you're keeping control of these kids. And then the opposite. When you got the kids out there and they're goofing off and acting up, they don't come and talk to you, they elbow their friends and they say, those kids need some tough love. Those kids have that teacher wrapped around their little finger. Because somehow, because the adult's not in charge, that means the children must be in charge. Now, and I just want to talk, while I'm on this topic here, just a little bit about obedience. Now, I think that there's this, like I said, this general idea that we want children to obey the adults. But we all know that the things we learn when we're young, we carry forward into the future. And do we really, in a democratic society, in a self-governing society, do we really want obedient adults? I don't think so. People who tend to obey others tend to not think for themselves. These are people looking for other people to do the thinking for them. Obedient people are not thinking people, and they're dangerous not just to themselves, but they're dangerous to the rest of us because they're not critical thinkers. They're not thinking on their own. They're not capable of self-governance. And so they look for somebody, often an ideologue of some kind, to follow. No, I don't want obedient children. I want the children I teach to question my authority. And I'll tell you how this shows up. And I tell the parents this too. I tell them in the fall when they come to the school, I say, I'm going to be teaching your children to question your authority. And they laugh. Usually it's they're already doing that. I said, good, they should be. That doesn't mean they have to be jerks about it. But that's a fundamental aspect of being a citizen in our society, is knowing that if you hear something that doesn't match, good example, the kids come, and the 2-year-olds, the first time I meet them, I always make sure my box of plastic farm animals is there. And I take out the pig, and I say to these 2-year-olds who've just met me, the pig says, moo. And that's usually what they do. They laugh, oh no, teacher Tom, that pig says oink, the cow says moo. But I always get a few of these. Look back at mom like, you're going to leave me with this guy that doesn't know what a pig sounds like? You see, I want them to listen to what I say, and if it doesn't match what they already know about the world, I want them to know it's not just their right, but their responsibility to call me on it. And so I invite all of you to think about your practices, where you work. And do you have the space for children to challenge your authority, to ask their questions? And to know that it's not, again, not just their right, but their responsibility to do that. Now, an obedient child is not a thinking child. And a lot of us will go back and we'll look back at history and we'll say, well, but, there's always been this expectation of obedience. But that's actually not true, historically. If you think about human evolution as a 12-hour clock, just the history of human beings, for 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 50 seconds of that time, we were hunter-gatherers. We were foragers. Living in these small communities, which is where our brains evolved, which is why in the early years it's so important that each of our schools reflect that kind of hunter-gatherer past. And anthropologists tell us in these communities and in contemporary societies, indigenous societies that still follow hunter-gatherer patterns, there's no evidence that obedience was expected of anyone. There's no evidence of established hierarchies. There's no evidence of there being big kings or chieftains. But that leadership ebbed and flowed based on abilities. Children were not expected to obey the adults. In fact, children were not even considered a special case. The concept of childhood is actually a very modern idea, relatively speaking. I think that idea of obedience really came about around the agricultural revolution. That's when humans started owning things. And then once you own something, you get to tell people what to do. I like to think about the English philosophers. There's a philosopher named Thomas Hobbes. Some of you may be familiar with his work. He wrote, back in the early 1600s, he wrote a piece called The Leviathan. That was his big his claim to fame. And he started from the premise that humans are essentially evil. And that without strong control of government, of schools, of parents, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. Everybody would devolve to their worst instincts. And we know there are still people who believe that philosophy today, even though I'm asserting most people in this room reject that concept. We reject the idea that humans are essentially evil. And philosophers in that time began to reject it. Later in that century, John Locke, many people considered like the grandfather of the Enlightenment, one of the key figures in the creation of modern democracy. John Locke took the opposite point of view. He asserted that humans are essentially good, and that the purpose of institutions, like government, like schools, like the church, is not to control the behaviors of others, but rather to help each individual achieve their highest potential. And I'm going to assert that that's where we all live. We're play-based educators. We want our children to be playing. We want to help them achieve their highest potential and not control them. But you see that balance. It still happens. I mean, both of these ideas are still very much alive in our society. In fact, I'd say we see it play out in our politics. We see it play out almost everywhere in our social interactions. We see it play out when people say that kid doesn't have enough tough love. Or that kid has the adult wrapped around their little finger. Now I want to start by talking about what I call the language of punishment. Jennifer and I live in downtown Seattle, and we've had kind of Amazon.com grow up around us. And if you knew Seattle, we used to have a downtown, now we have a second downtown. And it's packed. There are times a day when you go out on the sidewalk in front of our building and there are so many people walking out that you can barely move. And it's become a noisier city. There's horns honking, sirens, there's people yelling shit. You know, those of you from New York, you know what I'm talking about. And one day, not long ago, well, it's a couple years ago now, but it feels like it was just a couple days ago, I was out in front of my building, and there was a father from our building outside with his son, who's about 4 years old. The boy was on one of those Strider bikes without the pedals, and he was right in the middle of this crowded sidewalk having a full-on tantrum. Just a complete meltdown. He was yelling and screaming and crying. The crowd was sort of parting around him like this, in his face. And the father, who I do not want to parent shame, he was doing the best he could. He was doing what he felt he should be doing. He was knelt down beside his boy, and in a very gentle, nurturing voice, I heard him saying, "If you keep acting like this, I'm going to have to take away your bike for a whole hour." And that's a long time. He was threatening to punish his son, right? Take away his bike. No, why? Why was he threatening to punish this boy? What was he doing? He was feeling a strong emotion, probably a valid emotion. He was being frustrated, angry, sad, whatever it was. He wasn't hurting anybody. I mean, this is a busy, noisy sidewalk. You could hardly hear him more than half a block away. He was expressing himself. He was probably doing what therapists would say would be the healthy thing to do, right? He was feeling his feeling, and he was expressing it and getting it out. But his father was threatening to punish him. Now, I think we all know that if that father had been honest with the boy, he would have said something like, "The way you're behaving embarrasses me, and I feel it reflects poorly on me as a parent." Right?
Great.
But you can't lay that on a kid, can you? But instead he threatened to punish him, which I don't think is a big improvement. I mean, that's the level to which this goes. That we've at the point where it's not just we have to control their behavior, but somehow there's this idea that we have to control even their feelings, even their emotions. I'm sure if any of you who are parents who've been in a supermarket with your toddler and they're having a tantrum, like you might not have threatened punishment, but if you just got in my mouth, I'll get you a lollipop. right?